Let's get focused. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Phelan Focus. We are here today with a good friend of mine, Chef Melissa Ebele. This is our first episode of a 3-part series. Part 1, Primi, we will cover our guest story of going from side hustle to scaling a business successfully. In Part 2, Secondi, we will discuss how you can build your own momentum in your business. And in Part 3, Dolce, we talk about balancing life, work, pleasure, and passions. Melissa went from only having 3 guests attend her first culinary event to selling out culinary experiences, catering high-profile wellness events, and appearing multiple times on Dr. Oz and being featured in the New York Times. She's the founder of Via's Kitchen, a certified nutrition chef, and a fearless entrepreneur whose journey is anything but cookie cutter. We'll talk about how Melissa turned a side hustle into a thriving business, what kept her going through chaos, and what it really takes to build something from scratch. You can connect with Melissa on Instagram and YouTube at Chef Via Melissa or through her website at viaskitchen.com. Our goal for today is for you to reflect and get grounded on your own personal journey and how setbacks can shape success. Our focus for this episode is for you to start small and scale smart. Let's get focused. I am Mark Phelan. Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Ebele, aka Chef Via Melissa.
Very nice. All right, so today we have Melissa Ebele. She is a chef based on the East Coast. She's also one of our strategic partners in projections. She's a senior consultant. She helps us with health and wellness and brands. And we're going to have her on the Phelan Focus today to discuss her journey, her origin story. We're actually going to break this down into a 3-part series. We're going to be talking Primi, Secondi, and Dolce. Primi, we're mainly going to be looking at Melissa's background, my background, our experiences with our own personal businesses. In Secondi, we're going to be focusing on you as an entrepreneur. So if you're out there, if you have a business that you've launched, if you're thinking about creating a business, and it's going to be an opportunity for you to listen to the tips and tricks that Melissa and I have learned along the way, advice, guidance, and how to really build that strong foundation for you to grow your business. And then in Dolce, we're going to talk about balance, right? So how do you balance launching and growing your business alongside actually having a personal life with all your other roles and responsibilities, not getting burned out, and really focusing on your passion, your why, and why you're doing this. Melissa, we've had the privilege of working together now for over a year, and it's been, phenomenal getting to know you more. And I love sharing you with the team. And every time we connect, I learn more about you. So what would you like to share with the audience? Tell us a little bit more about your background. I mean, your accolades are phenomenal. For anyone listening, as you're listening to the podcast, check out Melissa's website. It's viaskitchen.com. I would advise you to look at her accolades, her experience, and really understand the guests that we have today. Melissa's been a phenomenal person for us to partner with, and I'm incredibly excited to have her on today's podcast for the Phelan Focus. So, Melissa, I wish I could read every one of your accolades. Some of them are going over my head, and every time I get to meet and talk with you, there's more things that you're up to. There's more things that you're creating on your journeys. Why don't you share a little bit about your background, who you are, and how did you get into the position that you're in, a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I just first and foremost want to say thank you so much, Phelan, for having me on your podcast. I am super excited to be here, and I'm also a fan of yours, following everything that you're doing and your entrepreneurial journey. But yeah, I mean, as far as me, so I kind of had a career pivot back in 2016. So I worked in sales and marketing for many years in a myriad of industries, from, believe it or not, Penthouse magazine, first job out of college. That's a whole story in and of itself. Ironically, so I went from Penthouse to Virgin Mobile, being their initial sales rep actually in the New York market when they launched back in 2005. Then I had a stint in hospitality at Travelocity. Then I actually did have my first bout at entrepreneurship in 2008 during the global financial crisis. Terrible timing. However, at that time, I did get certified in nutrition and personal training. However, having a business model at that time based on disposable income, which nobody really had, back in 2008, 2009, that actually led me to landing in the appliance industry in 2010. So I spent nearly 7 years working for Fisher and Paykel Appliances. However, during the entire time I was working there, I learned a lot. I really, truly honed in on my business skills and, managing accounts and managing clients. I originally started working with retailers in the New York metro area. Then I got a promotion halfway through, and then I was working with our distributors in the Northeast, and it was a great, great, great learning experience. However, the budding foodie in me was always around food and chefs, and there was an element of the job where I was always, doing cooking demos to train on the products that we were selling. Uh, Back in 2016, I was just really doing some soul searching and some digging and thinking to myself, I really want to work for myself again. Unfortunately, I didn't get the courage to do that until my mother was diagnosed with cancer. She is a survivor. She's okay today. I love you, mom. However, her diagnosis hit me really, really hard. And it made me realize life is short. You don't know when it's going to throw any curveballs at you at any moment. And I also was traveling quite a bit for business at the time as well. So I used that time to actually resign from my position to be a caretaker for her. Granted, of course, I know I could have used FMLA and, stayed in my cushy, cushy job that I was making quite a bit of money at, but I just had this inner burning calling and desire. So I resigned from my job to be a caretaker for my mother. And at that same time, I enrolled in a culinary program called the Academy of Culinary Nutrition, where I officially became a chef. Then, because I had so many amazing relationships with the gorgeous kitchen appliance showrooms that I was working with for Fisher Paykel, I then created a business plan a few months into my culinary program. I pitched my clients, or former clients, I should say, on my turning their showrooms into experiential centers. And I launched my business. My first event was November 3rd, 2016. Mind you, I'd only resigned in August 2016. From there, started to then get requests. I did similar events in dealer showrooms. And then from there, I started to get requests to do dinner parties, cooking classes, catered events. And long story short, which of course I'll go into more detail about this, throughout this conversation. But long story short, in the 7 years that I was running that aspect of my business full time, I ended up executing over 300 events. And I was published in media over 100 times. I wound up being a semi regular on the Dr. Oz show. I had many recipes published in the likes of Huffington Post. I was featured in the New York Times, NDT TV. I did some, cooking demo segments with them. And it's just been an amazing roller coaster. But that's sort of the long and the short of how it all began.
Melissa, that's incredible. I'm glad to hear that your mom's okay. And really what I'm hearing about your journey is that it by definition really sounds like it has been this journey where you're navigating your personal life, you're navigating what's happening with your family, you're navigating your interests, the economy, the industry. And what I gather from all of that is this continued approach of growth and development and also this refinement along the way. It's interesting to hear that version of the story in this conversation and being able to put all the pieces together. I've heard snippets of this and seen your background. Have gotten to know you more over the last year, and to see it laid out that way is fascinating, and it gives me some insights into how does one become a chef. How does somebody land on a television network, as a guest chef on, Dr. Oz? How does somebody execute, like you said, 300 events in 7 years? I mean, that's incredible. What a phenomenal feat. Really fascinating to see the development of a professional like yourself, and to also relate to it in the sense that there isn't like this direct path, right? You didn't go to some sort of vocational culinary school. You didn't go to, you essentially did it on your own, kind of midway through your career, as the result of having already been through multiple iterations of a career, it sounds like, and testing out the market, seeing what you like, seeing what you don't like, and continue to pursue your passion. So that must be what makes you such a great chef, is somebody that really is pursuing your passion and doing it because you enjoy it, but not necessarily because your family drove you to it, or because you have this investment in some sort of an education and now you just have to force yourself to make it work. And it really does show through your content, through you as a person, the passion and the interest that you have in what you do. And also, it's interesting that you are leveraging the relationships with the appliance kind of kitchen industry with being a chef. I was fascinated when I found that out about you. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a ton of sense. And so, with that journey, what you've told us some of the lows, and what are some of the highs of your journey that you've been through so far?
Yeah, actually, there's one important low that I do want to touch on before I talk about the highs. So, that very first event that I did on November 3rd, 2016, I will never forget because it was, supposed to be it was a public consumer facing event. And I thought, we would have sold out at 20 to 30 people. I had three attendees show up. Here I am. Oh my gosh. I quit this amazing job. I went to this culinary program. I had this whole exciting concept. I had three people show up. I thought I committed career suicide. Kind of touching back on what you were just saying a moment ago, though, I do have a story of, perseverance. And I had another event scheduled a couple of months later, not a couple months, rather, a couple of weeks later, same concept. It was called Flavors of Fall. And luckily, that next event sold out. There was 25 seats available and we sold out. And at that point, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I am onto something. Let me continue down this path. And then now back to answering your initial question. So as far as, some career wins, the fact that I was on Dr. Oz, I would say was one of the biggest highlights. Being on that show really just gave me such notoriety and confirmation, and having, had that opportunity so early on was just one thing that one can only dream of. I hope to someday have my own show, but, having the opportunity to be on a guest on there was just definitely the chef's kiss, so to say, and cherry on top.
I love that you use that word confirmation, right? And it really is very affirming. And it must have been so sweet to experience that, especially beginning with having essentially what most people consider an absolute flop of an event, right? A failure of launching your career. I can relate to that. My background, my initial career out of college was in the health and wellness industry. And so that's why I have an affinity for what you do. I eat a lot of the same things every day still. I'm not very experimental with my nutrition. I've eaten a lot of meal prep, and so my brain doesn't work in like a culinary way. I love going to restaurants, and I'm like, this is it to me. It's like art that you can eat, compared to a lot of the meal prep that I eat. But I remember when I was launching my career as a personal trainer, and I was working with a local gym where I went to university, and we were doing boot camps. So kind of similar with what you're kind of discussing with an event. And the first boot camp that we did, it was not impressive. There wasn't a big turnout, and this is in collaboration with a gym. And so we really failed more or less from all sorts of aspects of launching that first event. But luckily there was determination, and I had a team member that I was working with, and we just knew that we would just keep doing it and we just keep getting better at it because we were really passionate about what we were doing and getting out into the community. So it's really great to hear. I think that a lot of people, they end up having sort of a flop with their first event, or launching a product or business, or making their first social media post and getting 0 views or negative comments. And so it's you never would have ended up on Dr. Oz had you not gone through that. And you never would have had the success even with the rest of your events that have led up to that without having pushed through that. So that's really fascinating. With your journey in general, what I want to prompt the listeners with is really listen to the authenticity, I would say, in the conversation. And I'll try to relate as much of my own authenticity as possible to your experiences. And I want to rewind a bit. It's great background, and again, phenomenal journey. What was the point that you feel like it all started for you? Like, and you talked about what I consider paradigm shifts, right? Like with this, your mother having an illness, that is 100% a paradigm shift. I've had, accidents before that were debilitating, and it really is a paradigm shift in your life, and how you do things. You cannot do that thing, the same ever again. And it happens financially. It happens from a physical health and wellness standpoint. It happens from a family standpoint, with family members passing, people going through breakups, marriages falling apart. So there are these paradigm shifts that occur. I always see those as opportunities to kind of reassess. And it sounds like you went through a paradigm shift that made you reassess and reposition your life. And you're saying, like, life is short, do what I want. What triggered that? Obviously the family situation, but internally with you, what made you kind of take that leap into making that decision?
So I think it's because I was already at a point most of the first half of 2016 doing some brainstorming and soul searching. And I was even actually working at the time with a career coach in actually doing a program which was called Leaping from being a 9 to 5er to a non 9 to 5er. And, I was just trying to find myself, and even just finding myself spiritually at that time, because I just had this burning desire inside of me just to want to do my own thing again. And I was just waiting for the right, I guess, pivotal moment for that to kind of feel that it was the right time. And then I guess back to confirmation again. And unfortunately, it was my mother getting sick. But like you said, you have these times in our lives that you just make us kind of have an awakening of sorts. And that's when I just felt that that's when it was the time to do that. Ironically, so many years later, like I said, my mom, thank God she's a survivor. She's even made slight jokes saying, I can't believe I had to go through cancer for you to kind of take that leap to get to where you are today. I mean, it's great that she's at a place that she could, be silly and joke about that. But it is just kind of crazy how life sort of works sometimes.
Absolutely right. I mean, I've, struggled with addiction in the past, and one of the biggest things with addiction is like you have to hit rock bottom. Like that is not true. You can get sober before you hit rock bottom, but I think oftentimes people are looking for, or they wait until they hit rock bottom, either in addiction or in life with whatever that they're experiencing before they finally make that pivot. And luckily for me, I didn't hit rock bottom that hard, but there were some literally sobering moments where I realized, okay, if I don't make a pivot in my life, I'm going to continue down this path. And I had a similar experience with my career in general, right? I'm working this 9 to 5 job. I'm a project manager. This is great. I'm good at it, but I'm not fulfilled. And I need to make a change in order for me to really express myself with my career and what I'm doing. And kind of like that itch that sounds like you've always had with being a chef, mine has always with been what I discovered to be consulting. If you had asked me at any point in the last 15, 20 years, you're going to be a consultant, like that doesn't make sense. I don't see myself as a consultant, and I've grown into that position, especially over the last 5 years or so. How have you seen yourself grow from that we'll call it like a trigger point, from that trigger point before Dr. Oz, before, all the publicity and launching the events, as you were developing yourself technically as a chef, how are you seeing yourself grow in general?
Oh my gosh. So I'm actually going to say two things about that. The thought of me becoming a chef, I always kind of had an idea of it from a young age, but then the reality of what I thought a chef is and could be was that you had to be, in this grueling kitchen 12 to 14 hours a day. And although I have a passion for cooking, I never wanted that lifestyle as a chef. And then, like I mentioned, work in the appliance industry, seeing that there's so many other career paths in the culinary field really is what inspired me to get that ball rolling. But ironically so, though, I look back at some of my photos, food photos, right, that I took, and I would say the biggest growth is my staging. When I look at my early days of pictures, I would see myself just plopping something on a plate, not even considering the art. And then the more that I did events, the more that I then started to just pay attention to what other chefs were doing, and the more I was dining out. I actually turned dining out into homework. Literally, I would just pay attention to staging and plating, get inspiration, get ideas. As a matter of fact, I did a huge 5 week trip, biggest trip I ever did in my life in 2019 throughout Europe, mostly through Italy and Greece, and touched into Switzerland and Malta. But anyway, I remember I was in Uia in Santorini eating these most delicious lamb chops ever that were pistachio crusted. And it was the way, though, that they had these sweet potatoes, whipped sweet potatoes, staged on the plate. And I was just like, oh my God, this is gorgeous. And it's so simple. And then I ended up adapting that into being one of my signature styles. I did a similar but not exact copy of it to kind of make it my own. So I guess long story short, just seeing the evolution of, the way that I present my dishes and ultimately present myself and my brands as that's a reflection of it was definitely one of the biggest learnings.
First off, that sounds like a fantastic vacation that you went on.
It was.
I spent a year in Italy with the military, and I came back 20 pounds overweight. It was awesome. Yeah, what I'm getting from that is you're relating your craft, we'll call it, and the development of your skills in your craft with the development of your skill sets as a person, right? Like identifying how you plate something, and the more you experience and the more that you see, the more then you really begin to reflect and internalize and realize how you can enhance what you're doing, not just as a craft, but internally as a person. I want to hit on. One is the Michelin management method, which is what I've designed internally for projection to use. And the other one is what this common theme that keeps coming up in our conversations of exposure. And I love that you use that term exposure, especially because the term projection is sort of a film, camera, light, forward motion, analogy. And so with the Michelin management method, when it's about little over 6 months ago, when our team hit a tipping point and there were so many people, and there was so much communication, and the way that we were doing project management, there were conflicts between different teams, and I was observing the teams and how they were working, and I knew that we could work in a more optimal way, that we could communicate more efficiently, and I became obsessed with Michelin star restaurants. And I watched documentaries, and of course I watched Burnt and a couple of other, really cool Michelin star related movies. And I began conceptualizing a project management methodology based off of the French Brigade system, and just the concept that, to me, as a project manager and a consultant, what I find just, again, fascinating about Michelin star restaurants is that not only can they produce a incredibly high quality product at a consistent rate, but they can do so with a consistent demand and have a continuously evolving menu, essentially, and service offerings. And so I took that and I brought it back into projection. I analyzed how we do project management, the way that we communicate. And if any of you are familiar, some of this might be boring for you if you're not really into project management, if you don't have a tech background or whatnot. But looking at Kanban, project management, agile, waterfall, etc. And I advise you, if you're listening, to look into these methods for your own personal workflows and how you conduct yourself, like what Melissa was saying, how developing herself as a chef has allowed her to grow internally as a person with her own personal life. But looking at these workflows and how they work, how HR conducts workflow versus IT versus operations versus marketing is vastly different. And I realized that we needed a common terminology and a common methodology that everyone could relate to, and that communicates this elevation of skill. And so I designed the Michelin management method, and it essentially breaks it down into when a team member needs something from somebody else, they submit an order. Then it goes into a prep table, back burner, front burner, pass, and then served. And when I was testing that on a couple of the team members and brainstorming with them, it just clicks and it makes so much sense. And it's very intuitive. And it really has helped our team communicate and operate better. So it's a little insight into what we do at Projection. The second thing, exposure, I want to talk about that more. And it sounds like not only with your personal background and your journey, with starting your career early off, getting exposure to one industry, kind of pivoting into something else, having these paradigm shifts, pivoting into something else. I think that most people, their experience is that they're not on the path and they just feel like they're not on the path. When in actuality, you're still moving forward and all of these things compound. So I think I use the term compound maybe as much as you use exposure. So, as you're progressing on your path, all these experiences are compounding. And I have a similar, journey that I've been through, moving from the health and wellness industry into real estate, construction, and then getting into e-commerce and then IT consulting. And it never felt like I was on the right path, but I knew that my skill sets were compounding. And so it's great that you've been able to use what you've learned in culinary school, and even to have a skill set that you can travel, go on vacation essentially, and come back better at what you do, and be able to bring those experiences and that exposure back with you, and that it enhances your reflection, and that you, ideally come back a better person. What a phenomenal vacation or trip to go on. With that, one thing I want our listeners and viewers to reflect on as we kind of segue into the next portion of the conversation is, who in your life is quietly making your success possible? So I'm sure it sounds like your mom might not be that quiet about it, but it sounds like your mom has had some impact on you with that. What are there anybody else in your life that, again, throughout that journey, moving up to the progression of your business, besides your mom, maybe, that has impacted you either as a mentor or advisor, as a confidant?
That's a great question. I would say that, Jen Schultz, who I worked with as my career coach, the one that I was working with that, LEAP program in 9 to 5, she was definitely, influential and, always sort of there as like a cheerleader by my side. And then I think any of my other friends that were entrepreneurs, because nobody could understand what you're going through better than a fellow entrepreneur. They've been through it. They've been through the trenches. I have some really close friends of mine that are, serial entrepreneurs like myself that have evolved through many industries over the years, pivoting and being agile. So I would say, yeah, between Jen and my fellow entrepreneur besties.
That's great. The one thing I want to touch on is, along with that, is identifying the community that you're a part of. And so throughout my 15, 20 years, I've always straddled not just multiple industries, but multiple sectors, right? I've been in the military, either active duty in the Army or in the reserves or National Guard. And so I've had this military community that has a certain perspective on how your career should progress or what kind of job you should have, what your life should look like, essentially, I mean, even down to your lifestyle, what kind of lifestyle you should live. And then on the other hand, I have my professional community, maybe my community with my health and wellness, personal trainers or my buddies that are in construction that are building up their businesses that way. And then there was always sort of this third ancillary community that you alluded to, right? That entrepreneur community that I had where we were all just trying to figure it out. And what I want to touch on is identifying your communities. Can you relate to having some sort of communal conflict in a way where that's great that you had this group of entrepreneurs that would support you? Were there any other groups that you had to sort of compete with or that weren't in alignment with what you're planning on doing or the direction that you're taking your career?
Absolutely. And it's so funny that you say that. And I actually did want to touch on this. So, one of my girlfriends, actually, a couple of my girlfriends and close ish friends, when I told them, the idea and the notion that I was going to quit my job and, start this business, especially being a health focused, chef doing events, I literally had some people say, "Oh my gosh, there's no market for that. Are you insane? What are you thinking? You shouldn't be doing that." And fast forward, when those same folks started to see me have success, rightfully so, they actually came back around and they were like, "Wow, you had a vision and you had a vision that I didn't see. And congrats on everything that you've been able to accomplish and what you're doing."
That's the struggle, right? Of being essentially an artist. And I've got a really good friend of mine who's a director in LA. And as a director working in the entertainment industry, we had a really deep conversation a couple of months ago. And he's now trying to direct and produce his first major feature film. And he's starting to encounter some of the business aspects of the entertainment industry and film production and whatnot. But I mean, he is a tried and true artist, and he understands the vision of what he's creating, and now he's moving into the business space, and there is the conflict that you have to contest with. Through that conversation, what I gathered is that my good friend in LA, he is the artist that is in the business space. I consider myself that I also have a vision for my business and for what we're doing and understand from my experience and my background what I think is capable. And there's this constant conflict that you have to go through. I think any entrepreneur has to go through with executing their vision and thus their passion. Especially being in the military, I've had a lot of really phenomenal buddies that have been, at the end of the day, looking out for my well-being and have said, I would do that. That's probably not a good decision. Versus family members that are just, they have no idea what I do. They have no idea about the industry or the product or services or certifications that I got. That they probably couldn't tell you what I did for work, which is totally fine. And then again, those entrepreneur buddies that they have their own passion, they have their own vision, and they're moving in their own direction. And so one thing that I've gathered, going back to your friend who's giving you advice, and honestly, they sound like a really great friend.
Of
I
course.
mean, what I've learned over the years is that oftentimes when people give you advice, they're giving you the advice that they would want to hear if they were you. They're not necessarily giving you the advice that would be best for you, which makes sense. And I still encounter that when I speak with people about what we're doing in projection and how our organization is structured, the industries that we work in, the clients that we serve, and just the way that we work. It's very counterintuitive. It's a really unique, model, and it's a very unique way to create a startup. And I'm sort of immune to that because of, like you were saying before, exposure and having had pitched so many different business ideas and trying out multiple different ways to create a startup and trying and failing and taking different approaches, where I've gathered this perspective that when somebody gives me advice, again, the advice that they're giving me is the advice that they would give if they were in my position. And so now I've been able to take that, with a grain of salt when someone is maybe disagreeing with the way that I'm doing things. Is I don't just take their advice and allow it to force me to rethink what I'm doing. I actually try to think, okay, what am I not communicating to this person that from their perspective, this is not a good idea? And at the end of the day, like with your friend, I'm assuming that they're not a chef. I'm yeah, I'm assuming they're not a chef. I'm assuming they're not in, the culinary industry, that they haven't had, a career in appliance sales and working with interior designers. And they might not really understand the full aspect of what you're up to, and they might not see what you see. And so there are these communities that we sort of inherit, that we're a part of, that what we were talking about earlier, that as an entrepreneur, throughout your journey, you have to grow out of, which is really difficult because it's sort of like you're leaving the nest in a way. I mean, these people have been there for you with, every paradigm shift that you've gone through, and, hitting rock bottom and all these things. What I would advise to the listeners is really understanding that I think that for the most part, most people have good intentions when they're providing advice. Obviously, not everyone does. Some people they might be jealous, or they might not want to lose you as a friend or whatever that might be. I've got a really good buddy that every time he gets a girlfriend, I'm always downplaying. I'm like, I don't think it's going to work out because I don't want to lose him as a buddy. But now, luckily, he's happily married. He never calls me. He's got a kid, but he's successful as a husband and as a father, and I'm really proud of him. But really understanding that you as an individual are going to grow and develop, and your communities are going to grow and develop with you. That I don't think that you can fully express yourself with your career or your business or your product or your skill set if you're not willing to risk having conflict inside of your community / support system, exploring other communities, which you alluded to with getting that exposure and, kind of being the new guy in the group. I mean, tell me a little bit about how it must have felt. I mean, I can't imagine launching all of these events, but, and even, being on Dr. Oz for the first time, right? Being on television for the first time. Talk me through the feeling of the transition from being an outsider to kind of working your way in, right? I mean, because you're essentially you're migrating from one community to another, and it takes time for you to migrate into that. What's your experience been like with that?
Yeah, no, and that's actually a great question. I didn't find it too difficult to migrate into a community of entrepreneurs, because the way that I was successful in doing so is I just started to attend, networking events where I was with like-minded people. As a matter of fact, there's a women's association called NABO, National Association of Women Business Owners. And when I started going to their events and networking and meeting, women in a myriad of different industries, from, clothing stylists to interior designers, photographers, makeup artists. I mean, financial advisors, was very inspiring and empowering, and hearing, and learning of all their career journeys. And then, ironically so, I got so ingrained into that community that I spent a year being the chair of events on their board, given my background in events. And, they hosted events. So, of course, it was a natural fit. But yeah, I would say that transition for me, at least, fortunately, specifically, was not a challenging one.
That's a very solid form of validation, right? When they're putting you on the board for those events, it must have felt really good.
For events that I was doing for my business, I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? As a matter of fact, right now, the condo community that I live in, because I'm always just, doing get-togethers. Oh, do you want to go here? Do you want to go there? I got nominated to be the chair of events for my condo association. So we have our first event tomorrow. I'm like, as if I'm not busy enough doing so many things right now, and I don't do events as much as I used to, which we'll get into that at some point. But again, I'm thankful for it, because it's a recognition of my success and my talents, of what I'm known for doing.
It's true. I mean, in that case, literally your community is voting you into a position like that in your community as a whole, whether it's your condo association or the events, organization, or the entertainment industry, kind of voting you into that community, that organization. That's phenomenal. Thanks for tuning in to the Phelan Focus. If today's episode sparked new ideas or inspired action, please leave a comment, subscribe, or review on your favorite platform. Connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X at The Phelan Focus, or visit our website for more resources at thephelanfocus.com. Keep an eye out for new episodes wherever you get your favorite podcast, and until next time, stay focused.